The 2026 confrontation between Donald Trump and Iran marked one of the most tense geopolitical episodes in recent years. After weeks of military escalation, economic strain, and global concern over oil supply routes such as the Strait of Hormuz, indirect negotiations began through mediators. While there was initial optimism that diplomacy might ease tensions, the talks quickly revealed deep disagreements. Trump's statement that he was not satisfied with Iran's proposal reflected a broader clash of priorities rather than a single unresolved issue. A central point of contention was Iran's insistence on maintaining its right to enrich uranium. Iran argued that uranium enrichment is a sovereign right for peaceful energy under international frameworks. It expressed willingness to accept monitoring and some limits, but it firmly rejected the idea of abandoning enrichment entirely. From the United States' perspective, however, enrichment capability is closely tied to the risk of nuclear weapons development. Trump's position leaned toward eliminating that risk entirely, either through zero enrichment or strict long-term restrictions. This difference created an immediate deadlock. Iran sought recognition of its rights, while the US demanded guarantees that left little room for those rights to exist in practice. Closely linked to this issue was Iran's refusal to hand over its existing stockpile of enriched uranium. For US negotiators, the stockpile represented a direct proliferation concern because it significantly shortens the time needed to develop a nuclear weapon if Iran chose to do so. Iran, on the other hand, viewed the stockpile as both a strategic asset and a symbol of its technological progress. Surrendering it would mean relinquishing years of effort and bargaining power. For Trump, this refusal undermined a core objective, ensuring that Iran could not quickly move toward weaponization under any circumstances. Another major sticking point was Iran's demand for full sanctions relief. Tehran called for the lifting of all US and international sanctions, including those affecting foreign companies doing business with Iran. From Iran's viewpoint, sanctions were the primary source of economic hardship and therefore had to be removed for any agreement to be meaningful. The United States, however, saw sanctions as its strongest negotiating tool. Trump's strategy relied heavily on maintaining economic pressure to extract concessions. Agreeing to lift sanctions up front would have reduced US leverage without guaranteeing that Iran would follow through on its commitments. This mismatch in expectations over timing and sequencing of sanctions relief further deepened the divide. Control and access to the Strait of Hormuz also became a major issue. Iran proposed that both sides ease tensions by reopening the vital shipping route early in the negotiation process. It framed this as a confidence-building step that would benefit the global economy. The United States, however, viewed the blockade and control measures as key sources of pressure. Trump was reluctant to give up such leverage before securing firm commitments from Iran. From his perspective, reopening the strait too early would weaken the US position and potentially allow Iran to regain strategic advantage without making meaningful concessions. Iran also pushed for a phased negotiation structure in which immediate steps would focus on de-escalation and economic normalization, while more complex issues like the nuclear program would be addressed later. This sequencing appealed to Iran because it would provide early relief and reduce immediate tensions. However, the US saw this as problematic. Trump's approach prioritized securing nuclear guarantees first rather than postponing them. Delaying the most critical issue risked creating a situation where Iran could benefit from eased restrictions without committing to the changes Washington considered essential. In addition, Iran refused to expand the scope of negotiations to include its ballistic missile program and regional activities. The United States had long viewed these issues as integral to any comprehensive agreement. Iran's missile capabilities and its involvement in regional conflicts were seen by Washington as major security concerns. By insisting on a narrower focus limited to sanctions and nuclear matters, Iran effectively excluded topics that were central to US policy objectives. For Trump, this limitation made any potential agreement incomplete and insufficient. Iran's demand for an end to all military pressure further complicated the talks. It sought assurances that the United States and its allies would halt military actions and avoid future aggression. While such demands are not unusual in peace negotiations, the US was hesitant to accept them without strong guarantees in return. Trump emphasized the importance of maintaining deterrence and keeping military options available. Agreeing to such restrictions without clear enforcement mechanisms was seen as risky and potentially limiting US flexibility in responding to future developments. Another factor contributing to Trump's dissatisfaction was the perception of internal divisions within Iran's leadership. Reports suggested that different factions within the Iranian government had varying positions on the negotiations. This lack of unity raised concerns about whether any agreement reached would be consistently upheld. For the United States, negotiating with a counterpart that might not be able to fully deliver on its promises added an extra layer of uncertainty and risk. Iran's approach also appeared to prioritize immediate economic and political gains, while offering more gradual or conditional concessions in return. Its proposals often required the United States to take the first steps, such as lifting sanctions or easing blockades, before Iran would commit to significant changes. This reversal of the usual negotiation dynamic was difficult for the US to accept. Trump's strategy favored maintaining pressure until clear and verifiable commitments were secured. Accepting Iran's terms would have required a level of trust that did not exist between the two sides. At a deeper level, the dissatisfaction stemmed from fundamentally different strategic goals. Iran aimed to secure recognition of its sovereignty, maintain its nuclear capabilities within certain limits, and achieve economic relief. It also sought to preserve its influence in the region and avoid making concessions that could weaken its position domestically or internationally. The United States, under Trump, pursued a strategy focused on eliminating nuclear risks, limiting Iran's military capabilities, and maintaining leverage through sanctions and strategic pressure. These objectives were not easily reconcilable. Each side viewed its demands as essential to national security and was unwilling to compromise significantly. The result was a negotiation environment characterized by rigidity and mutual suspicion. Even where there was some overlap in interests, such as a desire to avoid full-scale conflict, the gap between their positions remained wide. Trump's statement that he was not satisfied can therefore be understood as a reflection of this broader impasse. It was not merely a reaction to one or two specific demands, but a response to an overall proposal that did not align with US priorities. From his perspective, Iran's terms required too many concessions up front, while offering insufficient guarantees in return. From Iran's perspective, the US demands were too restrictive and failed to respect its sovereignty and rights. The negotiations highlighted the difficulty of resolving conflicts where both sides hold deeply entrenched positions. Without significant shifts in approach or willingness to compromise, progress remains limited. In this case, the combination of nuclear concerns, economic pressures, regional dynamics, and strategic mistrust created a situation where agreement was extremely difficult to achieve. In the end, the dissatisfaction expressed by Trump underscored the complexity of the situation. It reflected a broader reality in international diplomacy. Agreements are only possible when both sides see enough benefit to justify compromise. In this case, that balance had not yet been found, leaving the talks at a standstill.